second half of the 2022 Motul FIM Superbike World Championship is up and running with the 25th staging of the Pirelli French Round. You join us 250 kilometres south of capital Paris in the département of Nièvre at the Circuit de Nevers-Manicourt, the only venue to have been an ever-present on the WorldSBK calendar for the last 2 decades. France had 3 different venues in the first 4 years of the World Championship, but the Circuit de Nevers has become the round's spiritual home since we first landed here in 1991. With 45 races now in the books, it's the 5th most visited circuit in the series history. 4.4 kilometres in length since its last major overhaul in 2003, its mixture of hairpins and chicanes provides no shortage of overtaking. The start-finish straight measures just 250 metres, largely ruling out turn 1 as a passing place, and the main action hotspot is the Adelaide hairpin, one of 4 corners named after and based on other historic circuits. Getting the run off Estoril and into turn 5 then, which has 2 different lines in head-to-head combat, is key. Next up, turn 13, where we saw 2 high-profile crashes from podium positions yesterday, and down the hill into Lycée, the last chance to make a move, as Toprak Razgatlioglu proved in last year's Superpole race. This may well be the first circuit not to have seen the lap record lured in 2022. Alvaro Bautista fell less than 1/10 of a second short this morning. Welcome back to Manicourt, just over 2 hours on from the last race action, in which Toprak Razgatlioglu moved into second in the championship, ahead of Jonathan Rea. Alvaro Bautista has already posted 2 podiums at a track where he had none before the start of this weekend, and Steve English alongside me could well maintain a lead of over 50 points, leaving the Pirelli French Round.
Yeah, we've seen all the way through this weekend Bautista doing a better job in the Ducati than I think anyone expected, given that this had been one of the tracks earmarked as a real Razgatlioglu versus Rea battlefield. As it is, Bautista and Ducati have done what they did at Donington Park earlier in the year. They've turned what should have been one of their weaker tracks into a track where they're just as strong as anywhere else, and Alvaro's going to be hard to beat during the course of this 21-lap race. We saw in the Superpole race in particular just how fast that bike is on the run from turn 3 towards turn 5. That's the big advantage Bautista has. Toprak's faster pretty much everywhere else, but when you give up a big disadvantage on a long straight like that, it does change how you have to approach the race.
Over the course of a 10-lap race, Toprak knew enough and was able to hold on ahead of Bautista. The two of them even clashed at one stage, with part of the fairing ripped away for Bautista. He managed to salvage second place. In the past, the result may well have been very different when there was a little bit of argy-bargy and a fight up at the front of the field. Bautista and that Ducati have certainly learned from past experience.
Yeah, they really have, and that's where, for Alvaro Bautista now, compared to 2019, shows just how different it is for him. That was the season when it all fell apart for him. This year, he looks much more in control.
Results of the Tissot Superpole race this morning that determine the top 9 positions on the grid for race 2 this afternoon, as well as World Championship points for that lead 9 group. Toprak Razgatlioglu victorious ahead of Alvaro Bautista. He and Jonathan Rea traded blows on the final lap. Bautista eventually came through for the 9 points, so only 3 lost to Razgatlioglu. Gains on Jonathan Rea, and actually his championship advantage only reduced to 55 points, so 58 now ahead of Jonathan Rea overall. These are the positions further down the order. Of course, those riders will take their grid positions based on their results in the Superpole session yesterday morning. 23 riders completing the race, just single retirement in Xavi Vierge, and he'll be starting all the way down on the 5th row of the grid with Iker Lecuona and Michael van der Mark. The same top 9 as we had in the Superpole session yesterday, albeit in a different order, with Scott Redding dropping from 3rd to 5th, with Garrett Gerloff dropping from 5th to 8th. But that promotes Alvaro Bautista onto the front row of the grid, and that means that we've got the top 3 in the championship standings all lining up alongside one another, with Razgatlioglu on pole. But remember just what a fast start Alvaro Bautista made in that Superpole race this morning.
Yeah, Bautista got a cracking start. Razgatlioglu struggled off the line, had to recover from 4th into 3rd through on Scott Redding, then Jonathan Rea, and then finally Alvaro Bautista. But it was a proper battle. Like you said, they even came to blows down in towards the Adelaide hairpin, and that's one of the things to keep an eye on in this race, to see how the early laps transpire, because what we've seen all the way through this season is if Rea and Razgatlioglu fight with each other, even if Alvaro on the Ducati has a bit of a bad start, loses ground in those early laps, the scrap at the front brings the race back to him.
Toprak Razgatlioglu, your race, Superpole race winner then earlier on here today, has been the rider with the most race victories in recent rounds. Took his first win of the season in Misano, backed it up with 3 wins at Donington Park, 2 wins in Most, and then victory earlier on today. Could have been a win in race 1 as well, had it not been for a crash whilst he was out in front. We ride on board with Alvaro Bautista. This is the strong start I was talking about.
Yeah, you can see there the bad start for Razgatlioglu, but a perfect start for Bautista. Gets to the front of the field then, and then he's under attack from Razgatlioglu and from Ray, but he was still able to come away with that second place, which was really important for him, because on that last lap he really battled in, he dug in to make sure he was holding on to those 9 points for second.
This morning, when I saw Toprak hit the front, I really thought he was going to increase his gap and pull away from Bautista. But actually, each lap around, Alvaro was there or thereabouts in the braking zone at the Adelaide hairpin, keeping Razgatlioglu honest. Wasn't straightforward, the victory, even though in the end it was a 2-second margin, largely as a result of that contact into turn 5 and then the scrap with Jonathan Ray on the last lap. It's
very rarely straightforward in World Superbikes at the minute, and even whenever you've got Bautista in the form that he's in, you can take nothing for granted, and that's what we saw at the front of the field. And Alvaro did everything he could in that race, and he showed the progress Ducati's made. This is going to be probably the instant that we saw on the penultimate lap, and you're going to just see that for Bautista, just tags that wing onto the rear wheel of Toprak Razgatlioglu. This is how different things could have been in that race. Both of those riders could have been taken out in that instant, and a big chunk of points being lost. As it was, Bautista versus Ray went on for the last lap and a half, and it was right down to the last corner, and it was Bautista that was able to come out on top. Big chunk of fairing missing as well. See, you don't need all these bits. They could do it with bare bones, and Bautista able to prove that by passing Jonathan Ray back and forth on that final lap. Entertaining scrap between the two of them. Yeah, maybe that's a lesson for Ducati and MotoGP. Get rid of the aero. But I think for Bautista, this is where you can see just how brave he was as well, with Jonathan Ray coming through. But into the last couple of corners, it looked like making the move at turn 13 left Ray a little bit susceptible down in towards 15. He makes the move here, but he has to dive through coming from so far back. That opens the door for Alvaro Bautista. And watching it back, he almost loses it there, trying to defend track position at the apex. So eventually Bautista was on the better line and able to find his way through. You can see there Alvaro Bautista trying to point out the issue he had with that fairing and how much it was missing. Jonathan Ray just ignoring that. He's not paying any attention to it. Interestingly, Ray in this morning's race made big changes to the bike. They changed the wheelbase, try and put more weight in the front. That's something that should play more to the strengths in the longer race this afternoon rather than in the Superpole race over 10 laps. Well, we'll find out, won't we? Because Jonathan Ray certainly needs to do something. Only 7 points scored from the 2 races so far this weekend, after not a retirement from race 1, but finishing a lap down at the back of the field following a big fall for him coming off turn 17. Yeah, and that's the end of the lap through the chicane. Ray made a mistake in yesterday's race, and it proved very costly for him. It took him out of the proceedings and gave up a big chunk of points to Alvaro Bautista. As it is, you can see here for Jonathan Ray in the early stages of this morning's race, battling it out in front of Toprak, and then they had a decent scrap with one another, as we've become very accustomed to seeing. But Ray on the Kawasaki just seems a little bit outgunned compared to his rivals. We've seen that with Alex Lowe's as well over the course of the weekend. The Kawasaki, just like it did last year, just as the season wears on, just seems to be a little bit more difficult to get the most out of that package compared to some of the other bikes. This is Axel Bassani, currently 7th in the World Championship. An almighty tussle going on for best of the rest behind the lead trio that we've already seen. Bautista, the leader, on 55-point advantage ahead of Toprak Razgatlioglu. Jonathan Ray, 58 points back. Then it's a scrap for 4th. Andrea Locatelli holds it on 157 points. There's only 25 points all the way back to Alex Lowe's in 9th position. So all of those places very much up for grabs in the remainder of this campaign. Yeah, and only 12 points between Bassani and Rinaldi, and we've seen already this weekend that the 2 races, Bassani's finished in front of his rival in both of them. They're fighting it out for that second factory seat with Ducati. Yes, and Bassani, who had twice got ahead of Michael Ruben Rinaldi last time out in Most as well, who was competitive with him at Donington Park, certainly feels he has a point to prove, and the two of them will be lining up one position behind the other once again. Axel Bassani in 6th and Michael Ruben Rinaldi in 7th. This is the home man, Loris Baz. Came close to a podium yesterday, more than half of the race distance. He was up inside the top 3 positions, sporting that French helmet, a special
special tribute to his home round this weekend.
Yeah, a little bit subdued there in his stroll to the bike. He's not looking too stressed at this stage. And for Baz, in yesterday's race in particular, we saw just how he was able to get into that leading position. He was fighting it out for a podium spot when he crashed out of the race, and he was pretty relaxed about it all yesterday, just knowing that it was an opportunity. It was one that's obviously gone amiss for him, but good to be able to get up into those leading positions as well and be close to Scott Redding as well as that leading BMW rider, because over the course of the last few rounds, this man, Scott Redding, has been able to firmly establish himself as the lead BMW rider.
Yes, second place yesterday, his season's best result, 5th position earlier on this morning, so that will be his grid position on row 2 alongside the likes of Lowe's and Bassani. Realistically, the top 3 on the grid should be the 3 riders contesting and battling it out for the podium, but Redding over the feature length distance yesterday was able to keep Alvaro Bautista honest, at least for the first half of the race.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting to see how much that was down to the fact that we didn't really know what to expect from the track. We didn't know if how the tyres would react out here. This was where we lost all the running on Friday in the dry conditions, so clearly the BMW was able to react very well to that. The Superpole race didn't really play out like that. It was a Lowe's versus Redding battle for 4th, and the Kawasaki man was able to come out on top of that, but it looked pretty hard fought between them, and just the different strengths of those 2 bikes, and a bit like what we saw in yesterday's race. Lowe's needed to be very combative in the 21 lap race yesterday, and you'd imagine he needed to be something similar during the Superpole race this morning.
55 points Bautista to Razgatlioglu. Even if Bautista walks away with 3rd today and loses 9 of that, it's still a pretty commanding advantage, considering that this was the circuit where he was supposed to be losing all of that 30-odd point lead, and we were going to be reset, weren't we, going into the final 5 rounds, at least if you listen to the experts. What a pundits though, eh, Steve?
Yeah, steady on there, Al, but Toprak was leading when he made his mistake.
I didn't mean you.
It was a big mistake from Toprak. There's no 2 ways about it. There was mechanical issues there with the brakes. Toprak said that that was what caused the problem for him. But regardless of that, Toprak was comfortably out in front, maybe by as much of a second whenever the crash occurred, and then he ended up having to fight his way through the field, and an easy win went amiss for him. And you'd have to say that for Toprak, that's something that he's going to have to regret, because you can't afford to give up points like that at your stronger tracks compared to Bautista. And
there are strong tracks still to come for Alvaro Bautista in 2022, little doubt about that. He's done well on Honda machinery, let alone on seeing what he can do on a Ducati in Catalunya, which is the next venue we'll visit in a fortnight's time. So every chance that Bautista could be among the winners over the course of that weekend as well.
Yeah, Bautista at Catalunya is going to be very strong. The Honda's going to be good there as well. Yamaha go well there with Toprak. It's going to be tough for Jonathan Rea in Catalunya. Then you go to Portimao, a track where Rea's had a lot of success. Toprak's been very good, and the Ducati's been pretty decent as well. So certainly this was one of the big rounds for them. This was one of the ones that they would have been earmarking as a chance to take out a big chunk of points. As it is, the mistakes yesterday are going to prove very costly.
Making our way up through the grid then in reverse order of the top 9 from earlier on today in the Superpole race. As ever, there was an almighty scrap going on for the last of the positions on the 3rd row of the grid. But these are the 3 men to watch. Jonathan Rea on the left-hand side of your picture. The pole is on the right-hand side of this circuit. The racing line going down towards turn number 1. That's Toprak Razgatlioglu. Championship leader Alvaro Bautista is between them. Let's take a look at the grid then, starting with your pole sitter Toprak Razgatlioglu and Jonathan Rea were tied on time for Superpole yesterday morning. They were separated by Bautista in the Superpole race earlier on today. 11th position in the end from race 1 for Razgatlioglu, but it was a fall from the lead. He bounced back to win in the Superpole race this morning. He's the favourite this afternoon.
Yeah, Toprak will be your favourite, but he also knows he's going to be up against it with Bautista. It's all going to be about the start. If Toprak can get away at the front and open up a gap, he has the pace to break away, but it's just about trying to get that space. We don't tend to see that too often in WorldSBK these days.
A win and a second for Alvaro Bautista in Manicure. You must be kidding me. He would have bitten your arm off for that kind of result at the start of this weekend. He's got to finish the job here in race 2, but the job has already started in strong fashion. The return, he called it, but this is even better than he did in 2019. He's going to lead the championship deeper into the campaign than he did 3 years ago.
Yeah, and that's the big thing for Bautista. It's about showing the lessons that he learned from 2019 when he threw away the championship. He can't afford to do the same again this year, so he's trying to make sure he's able to consolidate his strong weekends, and on the weekends where it's a bit tougher, make sure you're able to come away with good results. This should have been one of those tougher weekends. Let's see what happens in the course of race 2, but as it is up to now, he's done a great job of maximising organising everything.
Here is Scott Redding, who will be lining up from the middle of the second row of the grid. Jonathan Ray it is who completes the front row. Alex Lowe's and Axel Bassani here either side of Redding, who finished second place in race one. Of course, there were a few surprise results in that opening feature-length race of the weekend because of the double incidents, the two separate spills for both Jonathan Ray and Toprak Razgatlioglu. Rare mistakes from the pair of them, to be perfectly honest. Ray just getting it wrong, coming off the final turn and coming to grief, and Toprak Razgatlioglu struggling under braking, going through the gravel trap and down. And those two riders will be looking for big points in the feature race this afternoon. Well, we're expecting a moment's silence representing Superbike's British and Northern Irish contingent, who are marking the passing of Queen Elizabeth II on Thursday at the age of 96, the country's longest-serving monarch. Minute silence for Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of course respect from the Commonwealth as well. And the riders now will make their way back to their bikes ahead of race 2 this afternoon. Well, we've introduced the top two on the grid, Razgatlioglu versus Bautista, and to be perfectly honest, that is the way we expect this race to pan out. Jonathan Ray, thus far this weekend, has not had the pace to genuinely match those two. Yeah,
Ray took that Superpole, but other than that, it's been a bit of a struggle from the race. We saw him making that mistake in race 1 yesterday. At least for Ray, he remounted, got back to the pits, made some changes to the bike, went out, and he was able to gain some good understanding of which tyres to use for this race. But even then, the track temperatures very different compared to yesterday as well, up by a couple of degrees compared to then. So that pushes it closer and closer to some of the softer tyres as well. So this is where it's important to be able to put those lessons to good use from yesterday, and then see if you're able to get yourself right up there.
Jonathan Ray, who will complete the front row of the grid, officially classified 24th in race 1, as the fans organise an impromptu Mexican wave just on the grandstand in front of the start-finish line. Always a good atmosphere here in Manicourt. The French take their motorsport and bike racing in particular very seriously indeed. Second row of the grid, Alex Lowe's and Scott Redding battled it out again earlier on today. That could well be the fight for 4th position this afternoon.
Yeah, it could well be. We saw yesterday, obviously, in the longer race, Redding was able to do a really good job. Speaking to Lowe's, he said that he had really good pace yesterday, just wasn't able to use it, and that's one of the big problems you have whenever you're one of the slower bikes in the straight line, and you need to be able to be very aggressive to get your way through to the front.
Second row of the grid completed by Axel Bassani, who finished in 3rd position in race 1 yesterday, back on the podium for the first time in 2022. Beneficiary of circumstances, with 2 of the podium favourites, of course, ruling themselves out of contention for the top spot, but he had to be in it to win it, as they say, and he was there ready to pick up the pieces after coming through on Michael Ruben Rinaldi when he exited stage right in the first sector. Toprak Razgatlioglu picks up another Tissot watch after he took top spot in the Tissot Superpole race earlier on here today. And Toprak, who already won the Superpole race in Misano, Donington Park and Most, has a 4th consecutive watch and a 4th consecutive Superpole race win. Certainly doing well in the Superpole award also. Third row of the grid with Michael Ruben Rinaldi, Garrett Gerloff and Loris Baz, and it is Rinaldi here who starts in 7th. Just 1 place down on Axel Bassani earlier on in the Superpole race, and just a second separated the 2 of them as well, so we could be in for another scrap between those 2 Italians, both Ducati representatives, of course.
Yeah, the clock ticking for when Ducati are going to make that decision, and it's been pretty much a year since Rinaldi's last win on that factory machine, so he knows that at least being able to get onto the podium becomes really important in the next few rounds.
Podium will be the target for Garrett Gerloff as well after a 5th place finish in race 1. Far more subdued earlier on today in the Superpole race, down in 8th position. Lost a lot of places right in the early stages of that 10-lap sprint, and that left him with far too much work to do. So Gerloff needs to get off to a better start here. This, remember, is Alvaro Bautista. He set the fastest lap of the race in race 1, and that, of course, was a 1 minute 36.715. The race lap record here is 1 minute 36.374. And we got close to it earlier on in the fastest lap of the Tissot Superpole race, which was a 1 minute 36.411, also by Bautista. This completes your 3rd row of the grid. It's Loris Baz, who set a 14th position finish in race 1. He was 9th in the Tissot Superpole race, and hopefully we're just about to hear from the Frenchman.
Loris Baz, a difficult race for you yesterday, but the home fans to spur you on today.
Well, not so difficult. I enjoyed a lot the race yesterday. I had a lot of fun. It was a long time. I was not fighting for podium, so yeah, it didn't end up like I wanted, but I didn't expect to fight for the podium, so I just went all in when I saw P3 on the board, and I just tried everything I had. So yeah, it was cool to see 2 BMWs on the front. Hopefully we can repeat that. I can have a good start and be closer to the front. We had some issue this morning. The Superpole race was really difficult to finish the race for me. So yeah, I hope I can have the same start as yesterday, and I always feel better in the longer race. So yeah, let's enjoy the fans.
Thanks, Loris. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good to hear from Loris Baz before we get underway with race 2 here this afternoon. He will be well supported once again. What a shame for him that he couldn't convert what was a 3rd position halfway through race 1 eventually into a podium finish. He remounted for 14th. This is his fellow countryman Luca Mayas. He finished 10th in the end in race 1, but tumbled back through the order in the Superpole race earlier on here today. So his grid position is based on his Superpole performance from yesterday morning. We saw him going out trying to get the benefit of following Jonathan Ray. Ray would have none of it, so Mayas was restricted in the end. Philip Ertl will line up P10. This is the 4th row of the grid. Andrea Locatelli is on the inside of him. Ertl on the outside, of course. The prime position on the 4th row, that's P10. He was 8th in race 1, and that's a solid result as far as Philip Ertl is concerned, matching his result from race 2 in Most. He was 7th race 1 in Assen, his best result to date in 2022, only 12th earlier on in the Superpole race. Other riders who didn't make it into the top 9, Andrea Locatelli was the closest of them, but only 2 positions behind where he finished in the Superpole race this morning with P10. Not a good weekend, to be honest, for Locatelli, who was at 7th position in race 1, but benefiting from some of the circumstances. 3 6th places in Moss, 3 6th places in Misano earlier on in the campaign, but all of his best results date back to the opening 3 rounds of the season, so something to prove for Locatelli. 5th row of the grid for Iker Lecuona, Xavi Vierke and Michael van der Mark. Lecuona finished 9th, so inside the top 10 positions in race 1, again benefiting from those 2 incidents ahead of him in the field. Xavi Vierke was 13th for just a few points in race 1, crashed out in the Tissot Superpole race this morning, but thankfully no ill effects. He's back on the grid, and rounding out your 5th row is Michael van der Mark, who finished in 12th place in race 1 and 13th in the Superpole race. And all the riders on this 5th row will have high hopes to try and move forward, because none of the 3 of them have had good results so far this weekend.
Yeah, I think especially for Michael van der Mark, you can see here 15th on the grid. And the big thing for him is just to be able to get mileage under his belt, make sure that he's able to get through the weekend and get through it unscathed, and bring the lessons from this and the upgrades BMW have made to that bike since he was last on, and bring them to the fore whenever we're back in a couple of weeks' time in Catalonia.
That's the 5th row of the grid then, with Michael van der Mark. Row number 6 coming from further back down, Eugene Laverty, Kota Nazane and Roberto Tamburini. Row 7 with Christophe Ponson, Luca Bernardi and Hafiz Shireen, Tati Mercado, Oscar Gutierrez and Oliver Koenig completing the field. This is Eugene Laverty, of course a former podium finisher here in Manicourt. This will be his final race, or final planned race anyway, around this venue. He's set to retire from racing full-time at the end of this campaign, and making a transition towards team management roles in the future. So Laverty with a final race appearance here in Manicourt.
Yeah, and for Laverty it's been really tough once again. That was the case. Just let's go down to the grid once again and hear from Dave.
Yes, I'm here with Gim Roda, the Kawasaki team manager. Grim, a tricky weekend for you so far, looking to improve with a win here.
Yeah, it's been not. We expect some weather difficult conditions in Friday. Good weather yesterday and today doesn't give us any kind of advantage by now. But okay, it's a track. It's a track we know quite well how to take the most potential from the bike. But of course, Ducati and Yamaha working so hard. So let's see this race 2 how we can manage.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Continuing on then through the grid with row number 6, Eugene Laverty, Kota Nazane, and this is Roberto Tamburini. Of course, the mission for the riders on these back 3 rows is to try and make enough progress to get up into the top 15, which is where the World Championship points are scored. Yeah,
that's it exactly. I think for Tamburini, for Chris Ponson, for Bernardi or Nozane, that really is the target, just to try and score a handful of points in any given race. Yes, and particularly for Christophe Ponson, of course, a home round for him. He'll be looking for his first points since all the way back in Assen. Did miss the majority of Misano after a crash in race 1, and then struggled on his injury comebacks at Donington Park and Most, and this weekend 16th place in race 1, and struggling to try and make an impression on those top 15. As I said, alongside him Luca Bernardi, who himself has returned from surgery for the French round in 2022, and Hafiz Shireen completes row 7. Row 8 with Tati Mercado, Oscar Gutierrez and Oliver Koenig. 24 runners and riders, but it's all about your top 3 on the grid, your lead 3 in the World Championship standings as well.